Hello, my name is Kate Harrison and I'm thrilled to be presenting this session today looking at three main areas. We'll explore what emotional insight is. Next, we will look at how to develop meaningful insights. I call that drilling for oil, OIL. And then we'll be looking at how to use those insights to plan, write and sell both novels and non-fiction. Big data and consumer insight is the big thing in publishing right now. You can't go on the web without hearing how we must be number crunching and looking at algorithms and really trying to understand our reader on a mass level. But the thing is, readers aren't masses of population. They're not groups of people that you can give a single name to. They are individuals. And that's why I think that big data has its place, but those insights, the kind of observations and discoveries that we make as writers also have their part in understanding what it is that readers want. Let's compare the two. Big data is fundamentally information that's been analysed on a large scale to spot patterns, trends and behaviours. It is fundamentally quantitative, so it's made of numbers which often have to be run through big computer programs to understand what's going on. But as we've seen recently with all the controversy around Facebook and how the numbers and the information that we give Facebook are being used potentially for political purposes, to see that there are downsides to big data. Number one, and this is really topical, is the idea that big data is really invasive. So there are huge privacy concerns about how the information that we're giving, often unwittingly, is being used. The other issue I just touched upon, it's really crude. It really lacks the human angle. We're boiling people down into groups and we're looking at their behaviour in a statistical way. Contrast that with what you could call little or tiny data, and I prefer to call emotional insight. How I see insight is as actions, observations and conversations that have been observed and then are interrogated to reveal certain truths about the people that you're looking at or ourselves. They might reveal trends, they might reveal behaviours, they might give rise to ideas, and they are qualitative. And if the tools of tiny data or insight are sounding familiar, well, that's because as writers, we have them in huge quantities. So the same abilities and skills that you put into use writing and planning your books can also be used as insights. A writer's toolbox of skills and abilities includes being curious. We are all trying through our writing to understand the world around us. We are observant. We love to watch people and to try to understand what is going on, what makes them tick. We are original. People say that there are only 3 or 7 or 20 basic plots, yet every time we try and write a story, we are applying that through our own prism of experience, our own language, our own voice. We are empathetic. In order to get into the heads of our characters or to address a non-fiction audience, we have to be able to understand and relate to what other people are going through. And finally, we are eloquent. We love to use words to really pinpoint exactly what it is we mean and to convey that to other people. The idea of using insight, not just to write our stories, but also to understand the culture and the marketplace that we're writing in, is something that's come to me through the combination of my work as a writer and also my background working in journalism and television. So I'm the author of 19 novels and non-fiction titles, and those have been both indie and trade published. I've sold 1 million books. My work has been translated into 20 languages. My work crosses a number of genres. I think it could be 6 or 7. It depends on how you define it. Before I became an author, I worked in newspapers originally, then as a BBC correspondent, reporter and producer. And my final salaried job was working as a programme and format development producer and leader. So I was analysing trends and insights to try and come up with really compelling new ideas for programmes for BBC 1, 2, 3 and 4. alongside being an author, I do teach these creative and insight techniques both to TV professionals and also to writers. My first book was published in 2003 by a conventional publisher, and at that time I was really surprised at the difference in how TV producers and companies approach their audience and how publishers approach their readers. So in television there was a lot of thinking about why people watch TV and when they watch TV and what their emotional needs are at that time, their behaviour, and also what they felt about the TV programmes, as well as the numbers of people who were watching something. There was none of that at all in publishing at that time. So it was all about the individual whims or hunches of a team. So that would include the editor and marketing and so on. What we have seen since then is more of a move towards what is called consumer insight. It was called the same in television, and definitely that's the new big thing. But I think there are some things that publishers are getting wrong and that we as indie authors are in a much better position to get right. So a very quick summary of publisher-focused consumer insight and what it involves. What they are looking at is who reads and why. They're also looking at what readers are buying and how much they'll pay for a book. They're looking at how they as publishers can reach readers. And then another function of a consumer insight team in a publisher would be to test out new and established authors, campaigns, and covers. So maybe as an indie author, you've felt envious of the resources that are available to authors and editors in that trade publishing world. And certainly the information that they get can be useful, but I would say they've become really obsessed with the big data side of things, that crunching down and that categorizing readers. And as a reader myself, and I'm sure you are too, I know that's not exactly how readers work. A lot of it is to do with their mood at the time, what it is they're looking for, and where publishers, I think, are missing a trick is in looking more at that behavioural side of things. Big data tries to get that information by looking at the numbers, the ABCs, sales figures, algorithms. As indie publishers, we can really focus in on the tiny insights, on the emotional insights, and those will help us to reach and understand our readers. So what might author-focused consumer insight look like? So we want to know who reads my books and why. We want to look, yes, at how I can reach the right readers. We can use insights to test out new ideas, genres, and covers. But I'd say that what we're really looking at is how we or how I can give a reader the best possible experience so they're going to buy more books from me. As individual authors, I'm not saying that we throw the baby out with the bathwater. It is useful to use some of the big data, the algorithms and so on, especially if you're marketing on a platform like Facebook, for example. People have great success that way. But you don't have to understand all of that. You can delegate it. I would say that the emotional insight side of things is much more valuable for us. So what do I mean by an insight? Well, the dictionary definition says it is a clear, deep, and sometimes sudden understanding of a complicated problem or situation. An emotional insight is slightly different, and I would define emotional insight as a deep understanding that has been reached by observing, interrogating, and learning. So yes, that sudden eureka moment in the bath, I've got it, light bulb, does happen occasionally. But I would say that we can force some of those insights and make them more useful to us by observing and then going through a process that helps us to understand the critical behaviour more closely. And I've got a handy little acronym for this to help you remember. I hope you'll forgive me. It's called prospecting for oil. So if we're looking at an insight, the first step is to observe. That's the O in the oil. The second is to interrogate. Why is this happening? What are the reasons behind this particular behaviour or set of behaviours? And then the final letter is L for lesson. What is the lesson from this observation and from the questions and conclusions that I've reached? How can I use this either in my planning, in my writing, or in the selling of my books? I'm going to give you lots of examples of insights and how to go through that process. But first of all, where do you find these mystical starting points for your insights? Well, there are, broadly speaking, 3 spheres where you might find those insights. The first is just through your personal experiences. What is happening to you? What have you noted emotionally, physically? The second sphere would be observations, interviews and surveys of what's happening around you in your world, in your community, with your family, friends and so on. Often I have those kind of insights just through a late night chat over a bottle of wine. You can also specifically go out and interview people or observe them if you're interested in an area, or you can survey people online or directly. The third sphere, the widest sphere, would be the wider world, how people are behaving internationally, how people are feeling, what their experiences are of the world where we are in at the moment. And there are other worlds within that, so specific industries. I've explained before how the television world used to look very consciously for insights within their audience members and also within the rest of the TV industry, what competitors were doing. The same can apply to the publishing industry. And where you get that right, especially as an indie, that can be extremely powerful. So let's start with the sphere of personal experience. And this is the one that has made the biggest difference in terms of switching my career. And that's why I use it. So I had been writing full-time for a few years, and one of the things that had happened was that I'd put on quite a lot of weight as a result of sitting at my desk. And then I saw a TV program about intermittent fasting, where you're eating a lot less a couple of days a week. And despite having been a yo-yo dieter for years and years, I thought this was worth a go. And very quickly, I realised that just by cutting back, it was a life changer for me, and the weight started reducing. And more than that, I felt it was much more sustainable. One of the things I'd done at the beginning of the process was, having watched the TV program, I looked to see whether I could find any other information, and there was very little available. I went on, I set up a Facebook group with a few friends, I did research by reading papers and so on, and I just got on with it, and it was still working. And then suddenly I had a eureka moment. This was quite sudden, of thinking, hang on, if there was no book about this, I'm a writer, maybe I could write the book. So that was my observation to start with. There was no book on the topic. Once I had this thought of maybe I could write the book, I started to do the interrogation, so the I in the oil, and I started to look at why that might be, why there wasn't a book around it. And my conclusion pretty quickly was that, well, A, it was simple, but as I'd found, I had questions around it, and B, it was really, really new. So this way of doing it, there'd been the TV program, lots of people were trying it out, but no one had responded. There was nothing on Amazon. I was having a good look around. There was nothing being done about that. So the lesson clearly for me there was that I might be able to use my experience, so being a yo-yo dieter, but also my background as a journalist, and to be fair, as quite a skeptic, because I'd been through all of these diets and they'd never really worked for me, to maybe bridge that gap. So the next thing, I was conventionally published at the time. I spoke to my book agent, and I then spoke to my publisher about the idea of doing it. And they just weren't keen. Well, my agent was keen. She thought it was a great idea. But when we put it to the publisher, they pointed out that most diet books are written by doctors or nutritionists. There was nothing really out there by a failed dieter. And that was their reason for saying, thanks, but no thanks. This time we don't think there's a market. So I went away and I had a bit of a think about this. And I actually felt they were wrong. So I did a bit more insight and analysis, and I thought it through, and I was thinking, hang on a minute, no, it's exactly my expertise and my cynicism combined with this journalistic experience and my writing ability that meant I could bring something together that could bind facts with emotion, with my own diary of how it felt to be feeling fat and out of control, my health worries within the family, alongside the fact that my women's fiction that I'd written in the past was quite comedic in tone, quite bittersweet. So it would combine the emotional feelings with a little bit of humour, because that makes something easier to read. So I worked with my agent and we decided to indie publish. At the same time, I was looking at the wider world and analysing the fact that it was now, this was in 2012, suddenly really possible to use Amazon's platforms, both Kindle but also CreateSpace, to make books that were available. And even if it were to a small niche audience, that was going to be okay because it was worth a go. So this is one now of many versions of that book that I wrote and self-published. I can't possibly carry them all because there's been about 20 translations now. But that insight and my own conviction that there was something there led to a book that I wrote in a couple of months, but using 30 years of yo-yo dieting experience, that almost immediately went to #1 on publication in the Kindle bestseller list in the health and diet category, and certainly in the top 5 as well overall of Amazon, because it was the first of its kind. My publisher then said they would like to publish because they could see that the demand I thought was there was actually there. And I've worked in combination with them, but also carried on self-publishing a number of different titles. I've self-published one in Spanish because that was the one translation language that didn't get taken up straight away, and I knew there was scope for. So that was where a personal insight, I want to do this diet, I can't find a book on it, oh, hang on. And then lots and lots of analysis of that insight and of what it might mean led to a complete change of direction for my career. And certainly that book and the many translations of it is responsible in large part for that million number of books that I've sold around the world, and also for some really emotional emails that I get from people saying that they really changed their view of food by reading my book, and particularly by relating to the emotional side of it. Also, that little group that I set up with friends on Facebook talking about what fasting was, how we might try and do it, now has over 60,000 members. And I still use it to this day, insight-wise, to look at where people's mindset is, what they struggle with, because I've written another 5 books about health and diet since then. So that's where a very personal insight led to a whole new career for me, really. Let's look at the second sphere now of insight and where you might find one. So this is more of an observation taken from the world around us and what people say and what their experiences are. So observations, interviews, and surveys. The observation is that a lot of people have been talking recently about changing their reading habits. If you think about thrillers, they have been a really big genre, particularly the psychological thriller, in the last 5 to 10 years. But things are starting to change, and one of the observations, one of the things that I've noticed and other authors and publishers have started to notice, is that people say they've stopped reading sad or scary books. Not completely, there hasn't been a complete change in the marketplace, but there's been just the start of people saying, you know what, actually maybe those scary books, the world is scary already. So you can begin through that to start interrogating, both asking people why it is they're doing it, and also starting to ask yourself what that might mean. So if people are avoiding sad or scary books, why might that be? Well, yes, they're going to say, look, to be honest, the world is a scary enough place in itself as it is at the moment. We feel like there are a lot of violent movements. There's a threat of terrorism, of global warming, of states, rogue states with nuclear weapons, those areas of things. If they're avoiding those kind of books, what is it that those readers will now read? Because if we don't fill the gap as writers, they will go on to other forms of entertainment. So what might the emotional gap actually be? There is an effect seen in times of recession, which is called the lipstick effect. And this is where people who are feeling low and broke still want to boost themselves up, and they do that by buying small items that are not necessary, but are good value and can provide an instant hit, and in that case it's lipstick. There's definitely a trend upwards when people are broke but want to feel better. So what might be the emotional equivalent for fiction? Are people looking for books where people struggle, but instead of having a down ending because of crime or a scary ending, they actually want something that is emotionally satisfying? There are probably a number of different lessons and ideas that you could take away from this, but at the time of recording this, there has been a huge surge in the number of authors writing and the number of publishers and indies publishing what is called uplift. I'm not sure I like this term very much, but what those books have in common, seeing a larger than life protagonist, often with an interesting name, who is at a loss in the world, is really struggling, having a really miserable, very difficult physical time of it or mental time of it, but ultimately they win through. And a classic example of this one that is huge at the moment in the UK and internationally, is being made into film, has sold incredibly well, is the book Eleanor Oliphant is Completely Fine. Tick box, unusual name, larger than life character, a bit of a mystery, but instead of, if you've read the book, and I won't give any spoilers, but it's the kind of book that could have been a psychological thriller 5 years ago and probably would have sold really well, but actually by giving it an uplifting, slightly humorous tone alongside the darkness, you're seeing a book that is really hitting a positive note and feels like something that the audience is really lapping up, that something that they were looking for. So that is where you're going from an observation or what people are saying about not wanting to read those thrilling, scary books anymore, but wanting something that is an evolution into something that you could work into your own writing. Or when you're looking at planning a book, think about how you might introduce some of those elements that readers are clearly enjoying at this moment. The final sphere, and they do overlap to some extent, of course, is the wider world. So here's an observation for you. Technology, mobile phones, etc. makes thrillers much harder to write than they were before, because you can find people much more quickly, you can get in touch with people to warn them of danger. There's multiple ways in which technology and mobile communications makes a thriller much harder to write, and for the tension much harder to sustain than it was 20 years ago, 25 years ago. Incidentally, actually, the same is true of romantic comedy, because it's much harder not to meet people when you say you're going to. The possibility for missing people is much smaller. But we're focusing on that insight around thrillers at the moment. So let's then take that observation, you can flip that, reverse it, and see that actually technology also enables a whole new set of crimes that weren't possible 20 years ago, and also a whole new set of victims. So if you are writing a book with lots of tension in it, what are the ways that you can explore that, and what is that experience actually like for people? So if you are a victim of a crime enabled by technology, perhaps that means you are being watched at home. Perhaps that means that you can never relax because that person or that criminal is always watching you. It could feel a lot more invasive. So then you've got a whole different set of emotions that you can explore. You've interrogated that in a lot more detail than I'm going into right now, and you're following up your own personal areas of interest. The lesson from that, therefore, could be that you can subvert that new technology in your books to add tension, and there are a number of authors who've done this. So Angela Clark has written a series of thrillers around different technology, and she's really made a point of being as up-to-date as possible and writing those books really quickly so that they resonate. Lottie Mogok, her book, which has been turned into a Channel 4 thriller series at the moment, which is airing as I record this, that's spring 2018. She actually took advantage of some aspects of social media. Interestingly, in the new series, they've had to update that. They've actually moved, because things move so quickly between publishing and the making of a TV show. Myself, I've used a similar set of circumstances in my YA thriller trilogy, Soul Beach, which again sold around the world. And there I actually took an insight that I saw, which was that when young people especially died under really difficult circumstances, newspapers would lift the photographs from their social media, and that on those social media platforms, it was almost as if those young people who died tragically were carrying on their lives in perpetuity. They were frozen in time, but their accounts made it look as though somehow they were still enjoying their lives, posting from their holidays and their selfies and so on. And that went on to develop this idea of Soul Beach, where which was like Facebook for the dead young people, a kind of a limbo. So that one insight, that technology makes thrillers harder, can then be flipped on its head if you interrogate it possibly, and then you can do all manner, dozens, thousands, millions of possible variations that appeal to you as a writer and that will have an intrinsic emotional appeal to readers because they're experiencing it too. And a lot of this wider world stuff is also what you might call zeitgeist, which is a fantastic German word, which is also used in English frequently, which means the spirit of the times. It's the sense of what's going on. And I, for one, have always used zeitgeist as a way to find inspiration and insight for my ideas that then I hope will resonate more with readers. So my first novel, in fact, was based on the whole sense of school reunions around the turn of the millennium being a big thing. The first social media, if you like, really in the UK was Friends Reunited, which became huge because it was putting people into contact with people they hadn't heard from in years, and allying with that was a big nostalgia for the kind of music of your youth. There was even a series of events all around the country where people would dress up in faux school uniform and dance to old hits, and I turned that into a book, Old School Ties. If I look back on that now, it does feel a little bit dated. But the good thing, of course, about being an indie publisher is that you can see these zeitgeist themes and you can write and publish far faster than a conventional publisher is able to. So those are some examples of where we're using insight. Let's look, therefore, at how you might go about planning and tapping into those insights when it comes to planning, writing, and then selling a book. And I've got another nice acronym for you here, which is an easy one, and it's ABC. So one of the first things I always do when I'm planning a new book is, even before I've thought about what's going into it, is to actually start to write that short book description, the blurb. And I use these ABC tools to do that. And ABC stands for approach, benefit, and competition. They are, if you like, the building blocks of your book description, your book spine, and ultimately your marketing plan. So the first one is approach, and this differs slightly between fiction and narrative non-fiction on one side, and a more of a how-to practical non-fiction book. So for fiction and narrative non-fiction, it is really what is the story and style that you're using to tell that story. So your approach both to the story and to the telling of that story. So whether you are using an unconventional point of view, tense, whether you are using extra elements, for example, in your novel, like emails, like social media. With non-fiction, approach is about content, and it's also about the tone that you're using. So in the example of diet books, what is the diet? What is it that you're putting into it? And what is the tone you're using? So for me, in my 5-2 books, that was a conversational yet skeptical tone. The B in our building blocks gets right to the core of insight. And if you have done your job insight-wise well while you've been interrogating and learning your lesson, this will be easy, because the B is for benefit. What is the emotional and practical benefit of your book? Literally, what is in it for your reader? What are they experiencing as they read the book? And what are they left with at the end? This is easier in some ways to explain with non-fiction. So Non-fiction, somebody will have a need often to begin with when they pick up your book. They will go and search for that need on Amazon maybe, or if it's a need they didn't know they have, your clever marketing and blog tours and other ways of getting the word out will prove that they've got that need. And you will be offering something quite practical or emotional in the course of that book. So they will be learning, and they will be, through the tone that you identified and approach, they will be engaging with that content. And at the end of that book, they will have a takeaway. And understanding what that takeaway is, what that benefit is really key and core to selling your book, your non-fiction book, to the right audience. Benefit when it comes to fiction is maybe something you haven't thought about before, but if you've done your insight homework well, it will make a lot of sense. So if you are writing a thriller, what is it that the reader is looking for when they pick up that book? Well, they want to be thrilled. If you are writing a romantic comedy, the conclusion of the book is unlikely to be that much of a surprise, although some rom-coms do subvert the genre. So they're looking for a different experience. They're not necessarily looking to be on the edge of their seat as they turn the pages, but they are looking for emotional uncertainty. They're looking for humor. When you're working out the benefit in a fiction book or in narrative non-fiction, so a biography and so on, tapping into the emotions that you have spotted through your emotional insights is critical, because then you can start to plan your book, and then in the writing of it and then in the editing of it, work out whether you are delivering on those emotions to the max. There is a quote from Maya Angelou which says, "People may not remember what you say, but they will remember how you made them feel." And if your book really makes them experience that emotional benefit to the max, they will be putting that book down and looking for your next one. A quick way to get a handle on emotional benefits as you are writing fiction is to brainstorm or write down a few words about how you would like your reader to be feeling, both as they pick up the book, what it is they're looking for, as they read the book, what's the experience like, what's happening at the end of each chapter, are you maxing out the emotion or the benefit there, and how they're going to feel as they close the book. What is the emotional resolution for them? Often it will be something connected to redemption. A good way to go a bit further with that is to look at some of the most successful writers in your genre. Go to Amazon, and there's a funky little feature now on Amazon where it shows some of the most frequently used words in reviews, and you can look through that, and often the emotional words will come out, or just simply read the reviews by the people who are the most passionate about that particular book, and the chances are they are describing some of the emotions as they occur to them and as they read the book. There might be some other benefits as well. So if you're writing a book about another country, or if you're writing about another historical period, often people are enjoying an additional benefit, a kind of intellectual learning benefit that you might normally associate with non-fiction, but people love that. They really like to be taking something additional away, a knowledge or something that they can discuss with their friends. That's another benefit. Discussability, currency. So you might be finding that a benefit from a book will be to be on something that is a big topic at the time. Even if it's fiction, it gives people conversational topics, a water cooler moment. The final one of those building blocks for planning, for writing, and particularly for marketing is one that's very familiar to indie authors, and that is competition. And within that also the context of the marketplace that you're writing within. What is working at the moment, and what are you adding to that marketplace? In what ways are you writing a better book? In what way are you similar to what's there that helps you to market, but also helps you during the planning and writing, I think. So, for example, I worked out what the competition was in terms of diet books, and I also worked out what my unique selling point would be within that. For our final part of this session, let's look a bit at how you can use the insights and the ABC combined at each stage of the writing and marketing process. The first area you can use these two sets of tools is in developing your ideas, unmet needs, trends, conversations you've had, reviews you read, discussions in forums, observations, and then through the ABC you can be looking at how you are going to develop that idea. The next point is in the detailed planning and in the writing. The combination of the insight you've had and the needs behind it and the ABC, the approach, and particularly the benefits, is that you are uncovering the emotional impact of an idea or a non-fiction book, and you're using those insights to really amp it up, to maximize the benefit and the tone so that it reflects that need. As you're writing, you can also use, I find, those insights and the blurb, if you've written it, as a check. Am I doing what I set out to do? If it's changed, does that still meet the insight? Or if not, can I use it to bring myself a little bit more on track? And the final area where this comes in really useful is in the selling. Insights are a way of approaching your market research and also some of the details of the marketplace that you're working in. You can use insight to analyze things like titles, the way that blurbs are being approached, and you can then apply those as well to the big data that I was criticizing a bit early on. But if you combine big data and insights, you can get a really strong sense of where your readers are at, where you can find them, the categories, for example, that you might be looking at Amazon, where you might advertise on Facebook and other media, to come up with a selling and marketing package that will reach more readers than you might have done without doing that insight work. So as an example, let's look at how insights might apply to the marketplace. So your observation might have been that girl in the title used to signify a thriller. It really did. There were so many of them and it went on for so much longer than anyone might have thought. So it started with the girl with the dragon tattoo, arguably, followed by Gone Girl, the girl on the train. If we're going to interrogate that insight and we're writing a different kind of novel, what words or phrasing might signify an uplift title? We identified uplift earlier as those books featuring strong, unusual protagonists struggling, but ultimately having an uplifting ending. Here's the lesson I came up with. Yours might be different, but that the titles often feature the unusual names of the central protagonist, and that they're often also long titles, quite narrative titles in themselves. The Unlikely Pilgrimage of Harold Fry, okay, that is long, and the name is quite specific, quite unusual. The Mermaid and Mrs. Hancock, again, the use of Mrs. gives it a slightly formal, slightly intriguing feel. And finally, this big hit that I was talking about earlier on, Eleanor Oliphant, is completely fine. Super unusual name, a sentence, quite a long sentence. Clearly there is a subtext there that she is not completely fine. You can take the lessons from that, and if you come up with a similar title for your uplift book, uplift, then your reader is going to know that you're in that genre, even though some people would argue that the kind of slightly more literary fiction that uplift tends to fall into doesn't constitute a genre at all. You're still giving signals to the reader, and that is what marketing is all about. And if you've ever effectively missold a book to readers by having a title that's misled them or a cover that has not quite delivered what it was that they were expecting, you will know they go straight onto the review sites and they are angry and they give vent to their anger, and that's the worst thing you want. I think this is the nub of using insight for me. It's about making sure that you're not using the hard sell. Instead, you're really understanding what the reader wants, and you're using those insights in different ways to deliver, not to the people that are going to hate your books, but to the people who are going to love them and who are going to give positive reviews, who are going to talk about your book, and who are then going to be clamoring for the next book. I hate the hard sell. I despise that idea of trying just to get the numbers out there. But if you get your emotional insight right, do the observation, if you do the interrogation, and if you learn, you're going to have a much more satisfying writing and publishing experience. It's a bit like networking. You can see networking as being about throwing business cards left, right, and center. No, if you flip that around and you see networking being about meeting people who can help you and you can help them back in a beneficial human relationship, it becomes far more palatable. And that is the same with marketing. If you apply insights correctly, you are putting yourself in touch with the readers who are going to be grateful that they've found your work. I really hope you can see now how you can use those emotional insights to help you to get ideas for books, to plan and write them, and to market them. It really is gold dust if you can get the right insights. It touches on a lot of the lessons that I learned working in TV and now publishing books and selling 1 million of them. And there is also a free cheat sheet to titles available via my website. The website is kate-harrison.com/4-writers, and do get in touch. I would really love to find out how you are going to use insights in your books.